Boa noite, pessoal. Conseguem me ouvir bem? Responde no chat, por favor, se está tudo certo com o áudio, com o vídeo. Show, legal, isso aí. Todo mundo respondendo. Bacana. Vamos lá, então, galera. Hey, Jason, what's up?
There we go.
Better now. Good, that's good. So, Jason, I'm going to start talking with little Portuguese with them. And just to give an introduction, and then I switch back to English to get it started, right?
All right, sounds good.
Good. Então, pessoal, bem-vindos. A gente vai começar agora o webinar na AdaptWorks. Hoje o tema, Lean Change Management. Então, a gente trouxe aí o Jason Little, que é o autor do livro e do conceito Lean Change Management. Para quem não conhece, a AdaptWorks ela é uma empresa de consultoria e treinamentos para transformação Lean Ágil. Tá? Então, vocês podem dar uma olhada no nosso site, tem todo o portfólio de serviços de consultoria e os treinamentos disponíveis, entre eles o Lean Change Management. Hoje em dia, nós somos os únicos aqui no Brasil que dá esses treinamentos de Lean Change Management. Eu sou um dos facilitadores. Aqui na Adapt, eu atuo como instrutor e Agile Coach, então a gente sempre está trocando entre consultoria e treinamento, né? Um pouco na sala de aula, vai para campo, pega experiência, compartilha na sala de aula, e é isso que a gente acredita aqui. Bom, hoje, com o Jason Little, ele vai trazer uma apresentação para a gente, vai trazer um conteúdo novo aqui. E só queria dar umas dicas antes, pedir para todo mundo manter a câmera desligada mesmo. Tá? Quem tiver perguntas, no final a gente vai ter um espaço para pergunta, então vocês colocam no chat, eu vou selecionando, pescando algumas, né? Não consigo prometer que vou responder todas, que vou levar todas para o Jason, mas deixem as perguntas no chat, que já eu pego, e no final a gente vai falando sobre isso, explorando outros temas, tá? E também, uma dica, deixar aí no Zoom como o Speaker View, tá? Vai ser a visualização mais ampla para quem está falando, e o Jason já vai compartilhar a tela para poder mostrar a apresentação para a gente, beleza? So, Jason, let's get it started. Welcome, here we are, and introduce yourself. I just talked a little bit about myself and AdaptWorks, so feel free to introduce yourself and talk whatever you want to.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me. First, just to make sure everybody can hear me okay. Make sure the audio is good. Okay, yes, okay, yes, good, awesome. All right, so the very short version is I started as a developer back in the 90s. If anyone remembers what Cold Fusion was, that'll give away a little bit about how old I am. And started building various types of applications and call centers. And a fun fact, I actually wrote the newsletter engine for Harlequin. If you remember those old Harlequin romance novels, if you were getting spammed with email from them, it was probably the thing that I built in the mid 90s or so. And then I got into, I guess, fell into Agile accidentally. And I worked for a lot of startups, and it was working in an Agile way was just a thing that we did. So one of the teams that I was working with, there were 3 of us that started the company, and we grew to about 50 people in a year, and then got acquired and grew to another 250 in another year. And so we grew really quick, and we couldn't figure out how to manage all the work. So we started using some of the practices that are now part of various different Agile practices, mostly Scrum and Kanban. So we were limiting our projects to 3 at a time, 2 small ones, 1 big one. We called them daily huddles, and we were doing retrospectives every week, which was pretty much just going out for a beer on Fridays. So it just felt like a natural thing to do. And then it was the mid 2000s, I got started working in Agile with various different types of organizations. And since then I've been a product owner on a team, a tester, Scrum Master, internal coach, external coach. And I guess what got started me in this whole organizational change stuff was in a large telecom. I ran into a problem on one of our pilot projects where the senior director and senior manager bring me to their office and they say, hey, we really want this project to work, but we don't want Agile to get in the way. And that was just over 10 years ago. And for me, the question or what they were saying didn't make any sense. I mean, how could anybody not understand this Agile stuff? It is so simple. Why don't people just get it? And then I realized what they were really saying was, there's this whole organizational ecosystem outside of what the team is doing. And if our team fails and produces something that doesn't work or takes production down or whatever it is, they are the ones that are going to get the blame for it. So that got me started poking around into the whole organizational change aspect of Agile in particular. And it steamrolled from there. So the first version of the book was really just to tell a story. And this month actually is the 5th anniversary of the first workshop that happened in Munich, Germany. So that's pretty exciting.
It is. Congrats. Good achievement. And we hope to keep helping you to make it grow and spread the word out as we are doing here in AdaptWorks. We do believe in that, and I really see sense on Lean Change Management since the first time that I read the book, and it was really like related to the way that I used to work. And most of people that come up to the workshops say that like, I usually work something like this, but I don't know exactly how to bring those ideas together. So Lean Change brings some more kind of structures inside or for us to keep change going on. Mm-hmm. So Jason, I've got a little question for you. Can you tell us about what Lean Change Management is and what inspired you to write a book?
So the original intent was to tell a story, and the organization I was working in, we were an Agile coaching team trying to help this department of about 300 people in this 4,000 person organization move towards an Agile way of working. And the organization chose Kanban as the method of choice. So that was kind of the frame that we were working within. And then the more we worked, the more we realized that there was a certain pattern to what it is that we were doing. There wasn't kind of your typical current state, transition, future state, and logical starting and ending point to change. We found that there's too much complexity to try to help an organization shift with something that's simple and linear. And we kind of abstracted that away to, well, what we're really doing is listening and watching and seeing what's going on. And we're understanding the system that we're trying to change. And we're running experiments, and we're killing the experiments if they don't work. And we're changing them a little bit if they are working. And that really, the lean startup part came in. I had one lean startup weekend actually a couple of years before. So if anybody's been to one of those, on Friday night, you come and you pitch an idea and you have a product done by Sunday afternoon. And our product won. And then we started thinking about, well, you know, I worked in an organization that tried to build a product and spend $1.5 million and sold 0 licenses. So when it came time for the next one, I applied this lean startup method and launched a bunch of mobile products for this company and thought, well, what if we took that same idea and applied that to change? The idea of validation, the idea of the people who are doing the work and have to live with the consequence of the change are the people that know what the right changes are. We just kind of have to help facilitate and coach them through it. So if we took that kind of mindset into play, and then the book was chapter by chapter. I released it on LeanPub, and just chapter by chapter, that was it. I'd sit down, write the story, hit publish. Didn't check it, didn't get it reviewed, nothing, just to see if it was an interesting story. And then it just steamrolled from there. There was interest, so I rewrote the whole thing and republished it.
That's good. That's good. Thanks for sharing this. And also, what could you stand out, like a couple of difference between traditional and lean change management? And what would you say to the traditional change managers?
Depends if any of them are on the call. They might not like it. No, I'm just kidding. The main difference is there's, you know, our brains don't manage uncertainty very well. We like to be certain about where it is that we're going. If you want to test that theory out, if you take the same path to work every day, if you walk to work and you take the same path, try to take a different path every day and just see what your brain feels like when you get to work. It activates the thinking part and it makes you more aware. So the main difference is not accepting that uncertainty. So in Agile, you might hear stuff like, well, we need to embrace uncertainty. Maybe, but I take the view of we need to work to reduce it. And the way that we reduce uncertainty is by having small experiments with short feedback loops. So one of the ideas in traditional change management is you start a project out, you do a stakeholder analysis, you do a charter, you get everybody bought into the change, and then you start and you execute it. And with lean change management, it's more that alignment process is continual. It's happening constantly because no one will be aligned to the change at the same time in the same place at the same intensity. So it is more of a constant experimentation and learning, especially early on in change. Your goal is not, if you're trying to transform to Agile, for example, your goal in the first 6 months to a year is not to get to action or get to outcomes, but to learn how Agile will actually affect your organization potentially. So especially in large enterprises, they don't really know how Agile is going to affect the entire organization until they go through all of their traditional ceremonies and rituals like annual budgeting and performance reviews and all that stuff before they know how Agile will affect it. So taking this approach is, let's not worry about that big 6-month, year-long, 18-month plan and try to get it right. Let's try to learn as fast as we can so we can try to narrow the path. So we know we kind of want to go in that direction, but we're going to learn quickly if we should kind of turn and move a little bit. So the message, I guess, to more traditional change folks is actually, I find a lot of them work this way in the first place, but they get just as stuck as everybody else. They get stakeholders saying, where's the plan? Where's this? Where's that? And the other. And they know that kind of doesn't really work, but they have to appease the stakeholders. So I would say I had someone come through a workshop in Finland once, and she said the best thing that she got out of the course, coming from a traditional background, was I'm here to facilitate and I don't own the outcome. So sometimes you have to wait and see. You can't just keep piling change after change after change. You have to kind of let people absorb it, and the change will take shape when it's ready to.
That's great, Jason. Yes, actually, I asked about that because, like, in the Agile movement, we could see a lot of project managers kind of afraid to be fired, and like the whole experience would be thrown away. And that's not true, actually. But most of them think like this because they don't see their role into Scrum Guide or into Kanban. And as we can see, Lean Change Management already says that, all right, all the knowledge that we have collected in traditional ways can be totally used on this approach. So it's just kind of changed a little bit the approach to make these changes going on. Mm-hmm. And don't have to be afraid that they're not going to be fired like the project managers was thinking at the past. I guess that now it's not happening anymore. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just one more question. I have realized it, the audience coming to our workshop here in AdaptWorks, and I would like to hear about you. What's the audience for Lean Change Management, and has it changed along the way?
It is a very diverse audience, and I'll put this in. I'll put this in the chat so people can take a peek at it later on. But there's a list of titles. So whenever someone does an evaluation, they put in, are you an Agile coach, a Scrum Master, a Change Manager? And we collect all that stuff worldwide. So all of the workshops that happen worldwide, people go through the same system. And mostly it is people who identify as change consultants or change managers. Agile coaches are second, but probably about 50% compared to change consultants. And then it's a mix of, we'll get people on teams, developers, will come, HR people will come, managers, everything across the board, but the majority is definitely change consultants. And part of it is, it's interesting that people coming from the change management side don't know a lot about Agile or anything because they're not coming from that background. And they're starting to look at, well, hey, Agile is so popular everywhere, I should look for Agile change management. And they find our stuff, and then they come from that direction. And then Agile coaches already work this way in the first place. They're just missing some of the tools and practices at an organizational view, because many focus maybe on the team or managers, but there's a lot of good stuff like Galbraith's STAR model that was developed in the 50s is a really good frame that Agile coaches can use. So it's really cool getting both in the room at the same time, because you get the Agile folks that already know how to do this stuff. They'll read the book and they'll go, yeah, I already do this. I already work this way. And then they'll just pick a couple of traditional tools to help them speak the organization's language. So, and each class has its own personality. Sometimes it's all change people and no one from the Agile side, or it's a mix of both, which is really cool to see. What do you see in yours? Is it mostly people coming from the Agile side, or is it both? Or
yeah, actually, most of them from the Agile side, but at the last workshop that I run, for me, that was the best one, because we thought half, half Agile coaches and really good ones, and half well experienced change managers from traditional side. And then naturally they try to find their tribe, so they were trying to see the same table. But half of the workshop we've mixed them, and we had great conversations between them. It was really, really cool, and I believe that it's gonna keep on this way, half of them. It's really nice to see.
Cool.
And let's get it started, Jason. So you brought a presentation for us. Feel free to share it and do whatever you want to.
All right. Okay, so hopefully that's coming through. Everybody can see that okay? I'm just trying to manage both windows here at the same time. Move that one up there. All right, so what I wanted to do was, let me just hit play, and is that, so are you seeing the full slides, or are you seeing the preview version in the share? I have dual monitors, I want to make sure the right screen is showing up.
Preview, it's not showing the full slides.
Okay, so let me do that. And then that. Better?
Oh, good. Work it. Go on.
Cool. Cool. So because this is the 5th anniversary, woohoo, should have a party. I wanted to share some patterns and insights and a few stories of what I've seen basically around the world of what challenges people have run into and how they've used some of these ideas, because it's so contextual that it's always different from organization to organization. All right, so we already talked about this in the start, but this was really the blog post that kind of started the whole idea. This was after that conversation with the senior director and the manager, where they said, we want the project to work, but we don't want Agile to get in the way. And I started thinking, there's got to be a better way to do this. And then that eventually led to a talk at, I think, Agile 2010, somewhere in the US. And then Pearson Education approached me and said, hey, nobody's really talking about this change part of Agile. Everyone's talking about the technical practices, or they're talking about Scrum and Kanban and user stories and all the team stuff, but nobody's really talking about organizational change and the impact to it. So would you be interested in writing a book? And I said yes, and did nothing for a year. And then they came back and said, well, we're launching this new program called Live Lessons, which my Agile Transformation one and Lisa Adkins coaching Agile teams were the first to that launched that Live Lessons brand. And then that's really kind of what got me started down that whole thought process. And then, of course, like I mentioned, that led to the Leanpub version and then to the full rewrite in 2014 that still has a couple of typos in it, but not as many as the Leanpub version, that's for sure. So the interesting part about the new version was we had used something called Indiegogo, which is like Kickstarter campaign to launch the book. And the idea was the producer said, well, why don't you, we'll have a Godfather package, and whoever gets the Godfather package can organize the first workshop. And there wasn't one at the time. So somebody bought the Godfather package and said, hey, I'm from Munich, so I've sold 2 courses, next month. And let's get you over here. And I was like, oh, great. Now I got to build something. And then these were the pictures from the first workshops where they were extreme on the feedback side. So all the numbers and sticky notes that you see was basically after every content module, it was a retrospective, because I needed to rapidly test and get feedback on how to translate the ideas from the book into exercises and things like that. So it was kind of a good lesson through the workshop as well, to use the ideas from the book to actually build the workshop in the first place. And then since then, there's been over 350, over 3,500 people worldwide, probably a little bit more, but it really depends on who does the online evaluations. And in every one of those workshops, I've been collecting at the start something called a change challenge. So I get people to say, why are you here? What do you want to get out of this? Always start with the end in mind. And a pattern that became clear is it really didn't matter what country they were from. It didn't matter what size the organization was. It didn't matter if they were coming from the Agile side or the change management side. The problems were all more or less the same. People were looking for, how do I sell this change to managers? How do I get people to buy in? How do I overcome resistance? I'm here to learn some new lean and agile tools about stuff. But underneath it, it was, people are people, and everybody's having the exact same problems. We want to implement some kind of change that some people just don't want. And what do we do? So I kind of broke that down into a bunch of categories. And these are basically a count of all of those stickies. These are the things that were most important for people over the last 5 years coming to the workshops. And there's a big chunk obviously around the tools, because people see Agile attached to something and they say, well, what's an Agile change tool that I can use? How do I apply this lean change management framework or method? And I don't really call it that. I just call it a collection of ideas to help you nudge your change one step forward, because there's thousands of frameworks out there and we sure as heck don't need another one. So, looking at modern tools, modern practices, things around co-creation and buy-in, a lot of these are very similar to community building, if you will. So anybody who does volunteer work or does any work in their local communities, change kind of works the same way there as it does in our organizations. If somebody's passionate about something and they want to try to spread whatever that is, and they try to find people who think the same or who have that same passion, and then they get together and they create some type of loose process to try to move this thing forward, and then they try to get other people on board with it as well. And that's kind of the same way it happens in our organizations, but we really want it to follow a step-by-step process, but we kind of know it doesn't. So I'm going to share a couple of stories from people that have used these ideas, and then kind of what's coming with the next iteration. I'm expecting the next version 2 of the book, or part 2 or season 2, whatever I'm going to call it, probably sometime in the fall. Hopefully this isn't recorded, because now I'm kind of stuck to having to get it done by the fall. So everybody who's emailed me and written stories on the website and people I run into, they say, oh, I read the book. I really like the canvases. They're a really good place to start from. And we started with that, but then, and they always customize it. And that's the key is it should be something that you can adapt to your context, because every change is a little bit different. You know, if you just have to move a bunch of printers from one floor of the building to another, you don't really need a change canvas. Just pick the printers up and move them. If you're trying to do something that's really complex, like Agile, or implement design thinking, or start a new product, or, you know, acquire another company, there's much more complexity with that stuff. So people have said, we started with the canvas, we didn't like these 2 questions, so we threw those out and we added these ones. Or we really like the storytelling canvas, but we thought it would be better if people just silently drew pictures. Perfect. That's exactly but the whole point is what you're trying to do is the same. You're trying to align people and get people excited about whatever this change is. And I know there's probably plenty of people on the call who are familiar with Management 3.0 or visual facilitation or Lego Serious Play, using or innovation games, using that stuff within lean change management is a perfect way to get people kind of aligned with the change. So a quick example, this is from a government organization that was trying to implement SAP, SuccessFactors. So anybody who's worked in a big SAP or PeopleSoft project knows that they're big and they're really hard. And a lot of the times you don't see progress right away. So, you know, a logical starting point is, let's do a change canvas. And for them, they said, you know what, we already did the business case. We already bought the software. We already know we're going to do it. So let's just get started. Forget any kind of onboarding spin up type of stuff. So the first thing we did was to try to make sense of what this change was. And that messy, ugly diagram makes perfect sense to the people who created it, but probably just looks like a mess for everybody on the call. And we were just exploring the system. So who's impacted by this? What would they have to do differently? Where's the influence? What did the different departments look like? Just some basic questions to try to explore the ecosystem of this organization. And then that turned into, okay, now that we have an understanding about what it is we're trying to change, let's steal the idea from Agile around thin slicing. So for people who don't know what that is, you take a thin slice through your entire technology stack to de-risk your architecture, to get to good design quickly, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't try to over-engineer your solution right away. Sometimes it's called firing a tracer bullet through your technology stack. And we thought, how can we do the same thing in this change? Because ultimately 8,000 people will be affected. So we did a better diagram and talked about, there's a core change team, that's a support team. There's an extended change team that becomes our change champions in our network, but really the people at the, you know, in the outer green circle, the hiring managers, of which there were 300 or 400, really are the change agents. We're supporting them because they're the ones that have to actually do this with their 8,000 people. And that helped us figure out how to merge the technology part of SAP with the business readiness stuff and all the organizational change stuff and all the change management. We did personas. We had 14 personas of all the people who were affected, so we could see who was impacted more, and we validated them. So we brought these managers in and showed them all this stuff right from the start, and they validated that we were kind of heading in the right direction. Next thing was, what is the easiest thing that could possibly work? And the easiest thing that could work was, you know, the lead program manager had been through a lot of these big programs before in this government organization and said, you know, they get off the rails really fast. So let's get this stuff on a wall. They put the bottom left part of that picture where you see all the little color rows and things was basically the impact assessment. So we looked at all the divisions and departments and who was going to be affected by what, and that helped our implementation plan. And then he brought the stakeholders in front of this thing once a week, and they immediately saw how hard this was going to be. So they started from a place of, let's put it all up there and make everything visible, IT and business readiness. Let's not separate it out. And he was really excited about doing this. Some of the people at the stand-ups were kind of thought it was a waste of time and, oh, this is childish. Why are we using sticky notes? We have these tools. But they found value right away because that one program manager persisted. So the lesson was, somebody has to want to do this stuff or it won't happen. It's just as simple as that. But without an outcome, how do we know this is a good story? Well, there's his email. The thing that stuck out for me was where he said, "I'm positive things would not be in as good shape or have gone as smoothly without the lean change principles and ideas you shared with us early on." So this was, I think, 6 or 8 months after we had done the liftoff. And the way this brought people together and helped them understand the magnitude of this program is what really worked. But they didn't follow a recipe. They didn't follow a framework. It was always, what's the simplest thing we can do right now, this week, to make an impact? Because, we talk about goals and vision and how that stuff's important, and it is, but this was a success factors implementation. They already bought it. They were already going to do it. It was already going to happen. So they had to think a little bit differently. And for them, it was the smallest possible experiments we can do this week to move it a little bit forward. So that got me thinking around, especially in the traditional change world, we talk a lot about tools. Everybody goes to tools and frameworks. And, if you Google change management frameworks, you're going to find a few thousand, and you'll probably find a few million agile ones. They pop up all the time. But I take the opposite approach. I start from you and who you are. Like methods and frameworks don't have values and principles. Scrum may publish, here's the 5 Scrum principles: courage, transparency. I'm not sure if it's trust. I can't remember the other 2, but Scrum doesn't have principles. You do, people do, right? So yourself has to come through as a change agent. If you like structure and order and control, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the lens you'll look through when it comes to implementing change. So you'll naturally look for approaches that align with what you already believe in the first place. So you're not really picking a method anyway. The method's picking you. The technical term of this is confirmation bias. So if you Google that, you'll find out, right? Like our brains latch onto stuff we already believe and we go, yeah, that's the thing. So why not start there? Start with what you believe. Do you believe that you're there as a change agent to inspire people to love what they do again? That's my belief. And if the organization benefits from it, great. But let's start from where we are first. Maybe this is more of a North American thing, not so much in Canada, but in North America, it kind of becomes, don't be yourself at work. Send your professional representative to work instead of being yourself. So I'm starting from a place of be yourself, because if you're authentic, people will follow. That's just the way it is. If you're, people know if you're being genuine or not. So start there. And then find the mental models that help you make sense of the world around you. And these could be everything. There's thousands of mental models out there. You could call it a mindset. You could call it the approach that you take. There's tons of mental models for how we make sense of the world. And then based on how we make sense of the world, that sort of helps us figure out how we apply the tools and practices that we use. So our beliefs and our personality and who we are, the way that we operate inside of our organizations is manifested from all of that type of stuff. And I'll give you a little quick example from 2 completely different perspectives. I'm sure lots of people have been to an open space, right? And the way an open space works is people get together around a theme, they write down topics they want to talk about, they stick it up on the wall, they make a marketplace, and they go. So, I've been to tons of Agile open spaces, and that's how they work. So the picture on the left, that's where it's facilitated. The facilitators explain the process, they create the container, and it emerges. The picture on the right was from a traditional change conference I went to, and they wanted to try an innovative open space approach. But the way they did it was they had 4 moderators in 4 corners, and they had the chairs around the moderator. So the chairs were all facing the person who was being the moderator, and that person was deciding what to talk about and directed the conversation. So 2 completely different approaches of the same tool. And I was speaking there, and I told them this exact same story. So they did this in the morning, and then my talk was just before lunch. And I brought that example up, and I said, you brought me here to talk about Agile and change management. And here's the thing, if what you did in the morning was done in an Agile conference, there'd be a bunch of sticky notes over there, and a facilitator would open the space and say, here's how the process works, make it your own. And here what happened was the organizers controlled it. And I said, that's not right, that's not wrong, that's not good, that's not bad, but it's just, you're using the same tool, but your mindset or your approach is going to manifest itself based on who you are. And I've seen this a lot on the traditional change conferences, where even things like they'll try to do an open space, but they'll decide on the topics ahead of time. So we're going to do an open space. Here's the 4 topics. Go to the topic you want to talk about. And that's not what open space is. So sometimes you can kind of have the illusion of using some of these more collaborative, co-creative tools, but it's not really manifesting itself well because the mental model that you're using is different. So I choose to start from where we are as people instead of like this with the tools. So I Googled change management frameworks and found too many images to cram on a page, but basically there's tons of them out there. We don't need any more. And the idea around short feedback loops, what's the most important thing I need to do this week to move the change forward, is kind of how our organizations got to where they are today in the first place. I don't think anybody actually has one of these plans lying around in their organization somewhere, where 10 years ago we decided that we want to be the worst organization ever, and we're going to build all of this hierarchy. We're going to create all these different departments that compete with each other. We're going to implement really bad performance management, develop all these best practice guides, bring in a culture of blame. We didn't plan our way into this problem. So a lot of the organizations that are, they want to go Agile or transform to something, they're trying to plan their way to a new state that it just won't work. We can't use the same type of thinking, like managing a software project, to transform the culture in our organization. It's going to happen through tons of interventions over time. So if you think of it this way, there was one organization where I worked, whenever production would go offline, they would get 10, 15 people in a room, and they would just yell at each other for a few days until they fixed it and they got it back online. And then everybody would go back to their desks and everything's good. And then the next release, same thing, production goes down, they bring all those people back in the room, they yell at each other for a few days. The key to transforming is all of these bubbles represent events that happen in our organizations. And if we really want to transform to a new state, using new values, we need to respond to that stuff differently. So when something goes bad in an organization, what do? We create a new process around it. We need a new process for this because we didn't think of this. And then 2 weeks later, something happens. Oh, we need another process. And then you wake up and, I've been in organizations where they have to fill out 300 pages of paperwork just to start a project because everything got stacked on top of each other. We can't undo that with just another process. We have to start thinking differently about how we approach change in our organizations. Because change doesn't follow a linear path. It follows more like a wave. It follows, when we start to try to transform, things start to emerge. We start to learn what is it about our organization that really needs to change and what doesn't. And it's very unstructured. It's very informal. The people who love this Agile stuff just take off and run with it. And it seems very chaotic. And then we start to coalesce. And coalesce just means that we put a little bit of structure around it. So we might create an informal Agile COE or Agile user group inside of our organizations to try to take the movement to the next level. But if we go too far, we end up in bureaucratization. And that's where you see things like, I've seen this, those Agile people are out of control. We need to hire the VP of Agile who can just get those people under control. And then you end up with, I worked in one organization, they had 5 levels of hierarchy in their Agile COE. There was, junior coaches, senior coaches, managers, directors, and a VP. And in this model's view, that bureaucratization and decline is basically you're trying to transform your culture to a new state, but you're using your old values. So if you want the movement to continue, you have a choice. Before you move into decline, you have a choice if you want to start to live the new values and be congruent, or if you're going to go back to your old values, then you're going to hit the bottom of that curve again, and an intervention needs to happen. And what I usually see is in big organizations, that's 12 to 18 months, and they fire the consulting firm and they hire another one. Or they fire the VP of Agile and they hire another VP of Agile. But it all kind of follows that pattern. It doesn't follow a nice linear view. So the ideas of small experiments, short feedback loops within the context of a bigger picture allows us to be more adaptable, and it won't help us avoid this pitfall with any guarantee at all, but it just gives us a different lens to look through. So a few stories. This was a company called National Leasing. They're a heavy equipment leasing company up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And they had a problem with, I guess, the managers owning the change. So the change person, she gave me an interesting quote. She said, "The people who write the plan don't fight the plan." And the basic premise was they use the change canvas as a way to transfer ownership from the change team and the coaching team to the managers. So they were very clear that we're here to help and support you, but you guys have to do the work. So each of the different divisions, you can see the different change canvases up on the wall, had their own. And some used it continually. Some did the exercise once and never looked at it again. And if you can see the quick wins, the second flip chart from the left, each of the divisions had a quick win board. So whenever something good happened, wham, they put it up on the wall. And this was in a high traffic area. So this helped them kind of coalesce around a larger vision. And she told me when the system went live, 97% of the people felt well prepared because of the co-creative approach that they took. The link, you'll have these slides as well if you want to distribute them. The link is down there at the bottom. I interviewed her. I talked to her at the start of the change, halfway through it at the end, and did a podcast as well. So you can kind of see how the story unfolded over a period of time. But that was different from the SAP example I showed. They decided not to do a canvas because it didn't make sense in their context. So having a bunch of tools that you can kind of pick when you need to intervene at the right spot is more effective than trying to follow a recipe. So I've seen some companies try to do a canvas and they just can't. They just can't fill it out because it's not the right lens at the right time. They just need a hack or an experiment first. So give people freedom to pick. This one was interesting because I had so many naysayers say, "Oh, you can't do Lego Serious Play with people who are remote. Like that's against the Lego Serious Play rules. You can't do it." And I'm the kind of person, never tell me I can't do something because I'll go do it anyway just to see if it's possible. So this person was 2 time zones away, and we were doing a Lego Serious Play session around their this team in a media company that had to work together. And when they told me we have somebody who is in Winnipeg and they can't make it to Toronto, so what can we do? So I shipped her a kit with FedEx. I shipped her a Lego Serious Play kit, and then we just put her there on the iPad. And you can't see what she built, but basically what this team did remotely was they built a bridge in Toronto, connected it to the iPad, and she finished the bridge in Winnipeg on her side and said, no matter what the barriers are, we'll figure out how to collaborate in the context of a goal. And it was so awesome. I loved it. People are a lot more resilient than we think. So for these guys, it was an intervention for them. They were trying to figure out a new way of working, but it wasn't, let's come up with some pillars and a strategy canvas and this, that, and the other. It was, let's just explore it a little bit and see what happens. So pulling more creative ideas from other approaches into your change process works fantastic. And then one of my favorite stories, the link is there as well if you want to read that one, was an organization that I've gone back to visit a couple of times. And every year we do an annual summit. And it's basically we close the chapter on the previous year, we open up the chapter for the next year. And the context of the Lego Serious Play was we wanted to build a model that described the organization 6 months from that point in time when these three major problems didn't exist anymore. So we had 200 people in the room. That's the stack of Lego in that picture at the top. That's what $25,000 of Lego looks like. They had to, two guys had to take it on the boat from Copenhagen to Stockholm. It was an 11-hour trip because you can't take that stuff on a plane, which was really cool. So we had 200 people in a room doing a facilitated Lego Serious Play session, and we created 17 change canvases. So there were 17 teams, and they all created one little small one-page canvas with 3 experiments they were going to try over the next 6 months. And then each team went on stage and we recorded lightning talks. So each team held their canvas up and did 60 seconds. You know, here's the problem we picked. Here's our hypothesis. Here's the experiments and the sub-experiments we're going to try. And then 6 months later, we used a celebration grid from Management 3.0 to do a retrospective on the process. And it turns out some of the assumptions they had weren't right. So they threw out some of those change canvases. I think 5 of them were exactly the problem they thought they had, and they fixed them. And the rest of them, which was about 40% of the canvases, so maybe like 10 or so, pivoted a little bit. So it wasn't exactly the problem, and they just kind of switched some of their experiments. But the process of that heartbeat and getting into that rhythm is what worked for them. Plus, I got to dress up as a Jedi, which was pretty cool. We did a Star Wars themed event for the second year. So these are all just examples of, there's an arc of a story. National Leasing was implementing a new system that would change everybody's jobs. This here, they wanted to shift the culture, and they were completely overhauling all of their banking systems. And all of these stories are how we intervened in that system. It wasn't, let's create the comms plan and the stakeholder map and the 18-month transformation plan. It was, what's the impact we can make right now that people can go back and make a huge impact in their work, because we're going to keep doing those interventions. We're going to keep getting into a rhythm of getting this stuff done. And that's where the magic was. I would say in all of these cases as well, it was a multidiscipline change team. So there were agile coaches, change managers, HR people, external consultants working towards a greater good, which is fantastic. So the last part I'll get into is just the 5 major ideas that is coming with the next version. So based on all the stories and all the data and everything over the last 5 years, these are the 5 most important things that I've seen. And people value cause and purpose over urgency. So urgency for change is from John Kotter's 8 steps. People say if there's no urgency, change won't happen. But urgency just kind of feels stressful. The organization's urgency might be to survive. The executive's urgency might be to get their KPIs done so they get their bonuses. Staff's urgency might be, I don't want to get laid off. Manager's urgency, it's all different. But if we can rally around a purpose, we're more likely to coalesce people around a common vision if we stop using the urgency word, because it just feels stressful for starters. And especially in today's world, right? We're bombarded with so much media and social media, and we're stressed out enough already and overrun with information. So if we can rally around a better purpose, we're more likely to move change forward. The second one being, change managers, especially on the traditional side, talk about how important communication is. And then they'll say, but don't forget two-way communication. Well, that's not communication. That's broadcasting. That's like turning on the TV and having the news people read you the news. That's not communication. That's broadcasting. We want to switch and make a shift towards meaningful dialogue. And that's using practices from Lean Change, Management 3.0, Lego Serious Play, going back to the Agile Manifesto, innovation games, story mapping. These are collaborative ways to promote dialogue and shared understanding. And broadcasting doesn't do that. The third being, there's so much emphasis on resistance, especially in the traditional change world. I think it's still there in Agile as well. If you're familiar with version 1's State of Agile survey that's been running for 13 years now, resistance to change is always one of the top 3 reasons why Agile fails. But it doesn't, resistance to change in my view doesn't exist. It's not a thing. If people are actively resisting a change, it's because we didn't invite them into the conversation in the first place. We just said, hey, this is changing, go change. And they said, well, that doesn't make any sense. And then we say, well, you're resisting, stop resisting. People just respond to change. And as change agents, the best we can do is try to make sense of that reaction. And ultimately, we want to bring people, we want to be inclusive and diverse with our approach to change. Bring people in, co-create it together. Some people aren't going to like it no matter what you do, but if we're always coming from a place of resistance, we're coming from a negative spot, and it's not really going to help us move forward. So expect a reaction, expect noise, but separate the signal from the noise. And what that means is, some people just like to complain about stuff. Let them complain, and then really get to the heart of the matter. The fourth one is obviously co-creation over buy-in. Buy-in, everyone talks about how we get people to buy into this change. But if we're co-creating, we don't have anything to sell. If we have to sell, it's not the right change, not the right time, or not the right lens to look through. The final one being running experiments over executing change activities. And this one's fairly obvious, right? We can't predict what's going to happen with complex change. So we want to rely on feedback from our experiments to actually modify and adapt our plan as we go. We don't just want to check off the boxes. Like, I sent off the change communication newsletter, check. People are now aware of the change. I did the survey to people, check, that one's done too. So we can't just see it as a checklist. If you put all these things together, it's kind of like Voltron, right? Voltron, the 5 lions get together. I'm sure there's got to be some people that know what Voltron is. Sorry. Bolt things onto this. Take a practice from somewhere else that helps you with experimentation. Take a practice like Lean Coffee and use that instead of a communications plan. Use Lego Serious Play to facilitate meaningful dialogue. But you need to add and remove these practices based on your change. So what are you trying to do? Are you trying to transform a culture? Are you trying to implement a new tool? Are you trying to launch a bunch of pilot programs? The puzzle pieces are going to be, they should be able to be changed and added and removed based on your context. So the next iteration is going to be more, again, start from yourself. Use these mental models to make sense of your world. Now pick the puzzle pieces that make sense in your context. And this will kind of be like a little map that will help guide you through things like, if you do Lean Coffee, here's what's likely to happen. So if anyone's familiar with Disciplined Agile Delivery from Scott Ambler and Mark Lyons, their approach is very similar, which is, Disciplined Agile Delivery is a bunch of things you can do. And here's the pros and cons if you do or do not do these things. It's not a prescriptive framework. It gives you a bunch of pieces that you need to know which tool to use at the right time. So this one's kind of same. Yeah, there we go. Voltron, the legendary defender, right on. The new cartoon's actually pretty good. I guess since now everyone knows I watch cartoons, I have no credibility, I suppose. But hey, work is supposed to be fun. So if you could figure out how to use a Voltron metaphor in your next transformation program, or even, the Destructicons from the Transformers, that'd be a really good story to tell. So the key is balance. The key is to try to use these 5 dimensions and try to figure out what's the right balance. I've worked in some pretty harsh cultures, Telecom, capital markets tend to be very difficult cultures to work within. And sometimes co-creation doesn't work because people are so used to being told what to do. If we try to empower them too soon, they're not ready and nobody does anything. So you might have to push a little bit more at the start to get to a state of pull. So the idea is, just like the Agile Manifesto says, we value working software over comprehensive documentation. It doesn't mean don't do any documentation. It means we value this more. But sometimes you need some of this. So the idea is kind of the same here. You have to know enough about the system you're trying to change, and then pick the right stance at the right time, which is the magic part. So like I mentioned, this is just create your own framework from these ideas, based on your context, based on what you're trying to change, based on what expectations are. And then you can find a whole bunch more stories and things like that up on the website. And I guess we probably have a few minutes for questions, and I think I went overtime a little bit.
Great, Jason. Thanks so much for sharing that with us. Such an amazing presentation. And then, guys, have you got any questions for Jason Little? We've got some time. Yeah, we've got one. It's already written in English. Can you get that?
Yep. What are your thoughts on having a live roadmap? Okay. Yes, there's a story actually on the website from Sarah Baca, who had that on a program. They had a living wall that was updated, like a journey through it. What else? There was a telecom I worked in that had the same kind of idea. And if I can dig up the picture really fast, I'll talk about it while I'm trying to find it. I did this in one organization where we had a walking timeline of the company's history, which was really, really cool. And let's see if this comes through. Do you see that picture on there? Or is it still the slides? Picture, okay. Yeah, so we visualized this whole timeline, and the timeline down here are all the events that happened over time in the organization. So it was kind of like an information radiator at a company level, but every time a new product or a new milestone happened, it was marked here on the wall, and it was as soon as you walk into the building, which is great. This is the one and only time that I've been able to sell a company into doing something like this, because it's, you know, everything's in their heads. It's not like going into a product company where you can see their phones and the hardware they make. When you're making software, you don't get that same feel. But yeah, I love it. You know, have a mural on the wall. That's the best way to, number one, show quick wins and benefits, but that something is happening. Because in transformation, a lot of the times it's, you know, we're trying to change mindsets and behaviors, which you can't really see. So yeah, I think it's awesome.
Good, great, Jason. Yourself, is that right for you? Does anybody have another question? So,
hard to say. How far in the future should we look? Well, I've heard stories, I don't know how true it is, that the managers at Toyota look at the next 100 years. Obviously not to plan that far out, but that's what they're thinking of when they're making decisions that are for the greater good, for the longevity of the company. So it's hard to say how far you should look out. I think it's more important to review it frequently. So if you're looking a year or 2 or 3 down the road, just make sure you're checking in every quarter. Look at something called, I'll type this in the chat as well, called Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. This is basically business agility before it was trademarked. This goes back a few decades, this book, and it's more or less running your business in an agile way.
Great, great. So Jason, do we still have time for one more question?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So who's next? Moema Diaz said, I believe that he's got another question. No? That's it.
The culture thing is hard. I'm in the camp that you can't change culture. The best you can do is start with yourself, and hopefully you'll influence people around you to act in a different way. Merging 3 companies. That's a good one. I recently did Michael Spade's new Integral Agile Transformation course, which is fantastic. And one of the key messages I got from there was worry about the intersections between the 3 companies. Don't try to impose one culture on another, because it just, the culture is the lifeblood of the company, and one isn't good and one isn't bad, but you have to figure out how to have like an API connector between them so you can work together. I did a liftoff with a global change team for a company that's in 44 different countries a couple of months ago, and we had people from Spain, the UK, China, Germany, all over the place. And the magic was the stories they were sharing between them. The UK guys were very pragmatic, using some of these ideas. In Spain, it was very relaxed and very co-creative and community driven. And in Germany, it was very rules and process focused, but they were able to celebrate the differences of the culture, as opposed to trying to say, well, our way is right and your way is not.
Oh, good. So we are running out of time. Jason, thanks very much for sharing your knowledge with us. This presentation was just amazing. For those who could not see from the beginning, we're gonna get this video on YouTube into AdaptWorks channel soon. I will let you know, guys. Jason, one more time, do you have your last words before leaving?
Be yourself, be genuine, and change will work out.
That's it. Thanks a lot for your time, Jason. Pessoal, obrigado pela presença de vocês. Mais uma vez, sou Antônio Siqueira, da AdaptWorks. Quem quiser conversar mais sobre Lean Change aqui no Brasil, pode me procurar. A gente começa a movimentar alguma comunidade, trazer esse assunto à tona, compartilhando informações. E conforme outros lançamentos, outros workshops, a gente vai colocar tudo no site da AdaptWorks, tá bom? Obrigado por todos. Jason, thanks. Cheers, buddy. See you later.
Obrigado.
And see you once again. That's it. Bye, everyone. Thanks,
Bye.
Jason. See ya.